Dear Heavenly God, we thank you so much for bringing us here together. We thank you for your love and watch care. We pray that you'll help us to be prepared for the Vespers this Friday by understanding this article that Elder Tess put out for us to read. And we pray that you'll be here with us as we discuss its implications. We thank you, and we thank you for all your blessings. And we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen. So, okay, so for everyone who's here, I'm not sure who iPhone is, but we're reading that homework for the preparation for April 1st class. Have you read the first part of the article? We're on page 6. Were you here last Wednesday? Because I want to make sure that everybody understands it. Let's see.
Which article was that?
Okay, so can you guys see where it says Vespers, the 18th of March? Can you see that homework preparation for April 1st? Can you see it? Okay, so let's see. Oh, great. Okay, Sherry. Okay, were you here last Wednesday, Sherry?
No, I was not here.
Oh, okay. Okay. So Elder Tess gave us homework to do for the Vespers for this Friday. Are you keeping up on the Vespers classes?
When I can. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'll go ahead and we could just we'll go ahead and go through it. Okay. So this article provides important insights that the next Vespers class will discuss. You are encouraged to read it in advance. Note, please remember it was written August 2015 and the context is Gamergate, which previous articles and presentations discussed and explained. Okay, so the article is named "The Internet is Full of Men Who Hate Feminism." Some men have always been wretched. It only took the internet to make it obvious. Some women at least, have always known, for all the sense that we are in a generation finding a new voice, it may be more accurate to say that we are in a generation where an old voice has finally found volume. But volume brought consequences. Organized intimidation is now fair game for anybody audible to the mob, and everybody is audible online. And so if you guys have any questions, just give a shout. The most public victims of last year's Gamergate, so remember this was written in 2015 of August, so Gamergate was in 2015. Last year's or 2014, last year's Gamergate rage, yeah, that's 2014. Women like Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, and Briana Wu were not radicals. Very few of the women who have found themselves violently threatened are on the internet are. To view Sarkeesian's feminist frequency videos after reading accounts of her harassment is to be surprised chiefly by how uncontroversial her analysis feels. She points out that the video game industry caters to men. Women, when included, are typically set dressing as victims of violence or sexual reward. Is any of this truly in doubt? Is any of it more radical than a new voice reciting an old liturgy? Yet she was harassed as if she had proposed revolutionary insurrection. And so during the last week of August, Sarkeesian, an ordinary woman with a message so innocuous that a sane world might deem it obvious, was forced to flee from her home. As it happens, I'd spent several nights in August with one of her antagonists. He claims he's not the kind to send explicit threats, and he wasn't involved in Gamergate. He's just a man who takes a dim view of Sarkeesian. He says and hasn't been afraid to tweet her about it. He doesn't think much of feminism in general, or at least of what he says feminism became once the voting and the jobs of the abortion rights were sorted, and the word became a dog whistle for self-pity and sexism towards men. His name is Max, although it isn't, of course, and he is a men's rights activist, MRA, men's rights activist. I found him because I wanted to know what these men were like, not on Reddit or on Twitter or on any other forum where they are actively engaged in their cause, but in ordinary life, relaxed after having a few and without a keyboard to take it out on. I'll make you a bet. So quote, I'll make you a bet, $100, Max tells me, the first night we hang out. If both of us stood up on this table right now and started yelling what we think about feminism, somebody might tell you to shut up, but they would lynch me. Men's rights activism, MRA, has been in the undercurrent of American culture since at least the 1970s and has been largely explicit in its role as a backlash against feminism. The movement has neither a central platform nor any acclimated leaders, but the central themes are consistent. It is men, not women, who are oppressed. Men are required to enter the selective service. Women are immune. Men typically lose their children in otherwise equal custody disputes. Men are expected to work dangerous and difficult jobs in construction and agriculture. Beyond these overt disadvantages, they claim more subtle systemic disrespect from a culture increasingly focused on what they take to be feminine values, for emotional expressiveness to total sexual and reproductive liberation. When they vary, it is in extremity, with some merely decrying the anti-male attitude of feminism and others seeking, for example, to reverse the criminalization of marital rape. Okay. So when I met him, Max lived in the River North neighborhood of Chicago. River North is at 70% white in a city where the white population is 32% and declining. One of the few places one can live in Chicago, where it is still possible to avoid even a vague awareness of the city's racial and cultural dynamics. I found Max on Reddit, on a forum largely devoted to making fun of teenage leftists on Tumblr. It was only good luck that he lived in my city and was willing to talk. In the popular imagination, men's rights activists, MRA, are neckbeards, morbidly obese basement dwellers with a suspect affection for My Little Pony. But Max is remarkably unassuming in appearance, handsome enough and normally tall, equally imaginable in board shorts and a snapback, as he is in the sort of graduation suit one wears to a first post-collegiate interview downtown. He was raised in St. Louis, one of two children. He has a brother, younger. Quote, he goes to school in Seattle, kind of a hippie, unquote. His parents are alive and married. Before Max was born, his father was a unionized carpenter in Newark, New Jersey, part of a long line of the same until the 1980s came around and Max Sr. followed the dawn of management consultancy into a white-collar job in the Midwest suburbs. When Max came to Chicago in 2006, it was for college. Quote, not the first in my family to go to college, but the first to go at the normal time, that is at 18. 4 years after graduating, he has a solid entry-level job at an area financial institution. Quote, plenty of women work there, he offers in the middle of a preliminary biographical rundown. They're getting paid the same as me, unquote. We had not yet begun discussing politics. Max fits in with the crowd at the faux Mexican bar where we spend several nights in August. $8 tequila shots, polo shirts tucked in, or dress shirts tucked out of pre-faded jeans. Groups of guests emitting an oscillating screech from every booth. Quote, this is just like my neighborhood place, he tells me the first time we walk in the door. Not the kind of spot he'd hit up on a Friday or where he'd look for what he insists on calling action. Quote, these girls here are a little, he said, could be fun, definitely annoying, distinguishing them from the similarly well-highlighted halter-topped women he shows me on Facebook as examples of what he's into requires some capacity for discernment I do not possess. He has a different colored polo on all 3 nights I see him. Max was not a member of Gamergate proper. This isn't terribly uncommon. Men's rights activists, MRA, exist who disdain that particular episode, if not for its virulence, then for its celebration of men who prefer Dungeons and Dragons to Monday Night Football. Similarly, there are Gamergate activists who remain stubbornly committed to the idea that they are ethicists of video game journalism. We went over this last time. I still don't understand what that word is. Ethicist, like maybe ethical. Like, I don't know, of video game journalism, wholly detached from men as a generalized political class. But these vulgarities, the specific grievances of Gamergate, the sort of person who self-applies MRA, men's rights activist, versus the sort who prefers some other acronym, are merely symptoms of a broader male sense of victimhood. It is this victimhood complex I intend to tell you about, not the particular schisms between reactionaries. I am interested in the style of man who makes all such factions explicable. The kind who has, in these last decades, felt the theoretical foundation of his inherited supremacy begin to crumble and gone into defensive crouch, lashing out at every grain of sand that shifts beneath his feet. Any questions or comments so far?
No.
Okay, thank you. Some section of men have always jealously guarded their privilege, but we are for the first time seeing what happens when that same section begins to lose their assumption of its divine right. It isn't that they're monsters. Max is this kind of man. He is not the same. Max is this kind of man. He is not some fountain of malevolence. He is the mildest kind. I spent August with a well-adjusted man in a polo shirt who would never think to hurt someone except in self-defense. But he comes from a pot where new anger is boiling. And at least one of the bubbles so far was named Elliot Oliver Roger, the 22-year-old man who went on a shooting spree last year near the University of California, Santa Barbara, an act he said was the result of being rejected by women. I'm not one of those guys who's obsessed, Max tells me on our first night together. Quote, like, yeah, I comment on articles, I'm on Reddit, which by the way, it's not like a hub for MRAs or anything, men's rights activists. There are plenty of feminists on there, but I do that and I tweet and stuff, but only a few hours a week max. And most of it is just reading the news, unquote. He says this, I think, to distinguish between himself and the common, not altogether inaccurate conception of men's rights activists as sexually frustrated loners with too much time on their hands. But the caveat comes with some regret, as though Max wishes he were more involved in fighting the good fight. Quote, like, I didn't go to that big men's rights conference earlier this summer, but, unquote. The thought is interrupted by the arrival of his enchiladas, a subsequent discussion of our waitress's outfit, and some thoughts on, quote, the market forces and basic social realities behind it that he thinks I might be interested in it. And the waitress, she is wearing what I can only describe as a perfectly ordinary outfit for a waitress: white blouse, black jacket, black pants. Max has a more elaborate take. Quote, it's like halfway between modest and revealing, adjust for social morals, and it's like Victorian. She wants dignity. She wants to be chaste, same time. And fine, that's how it's always been. But I bet she'd say, I didn't wear this for you. Like, yes, you did. Not because she wants to sleep with me. It's to get tips. But when you go out later, it's to attract a guy. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know? Unquote. The discussion is not terribly dissimilar from or any less agreeable than one between any two men at any bar like this bar, except that Max is a new kind of reactionary. And I know this, and I'm a lefty feminist writer who takes a dim view of his politics. And Max knows this as well. I'm not surprised to learn that those politics took shape in high school. I have to admit, the first time I read this part where it said that this person was a lefty feminist writer, I automatically assumed that it was a woman. But this writer, this reporter, is actually a guy, which totally makes sense when you hear what they're doing at the bar, taking shots and stuff like that, because I was kind of worried about the woman. Like, they're doing shots? But it's a guy. So, okay, so quote, when I was like 10 or whatever, I'm sure I would have said I was a feminist if I had known the word, Max says. My mom says she's a feminist, and I guess in a way my mom means it. I still am, but she doesn't know how it is now. For her, feminism means everybody's equal. But if you said that now, these social justice warriors on Tumblr would call you a sexist and garbage and tell you to die. But I didn't realize that at first. I thought feminists meant women should be able to vote and have jobs, which I'm obviously cool with. Okay, so he's okay with women being able to vote and have jobs, but not for everybody to be equal, apparently.
Yeah.
So Max says he wasn't terribly unpopular in high school, but read more than was socially viable, most of it on the computer. No girlfriend, he says. What else are you going to do when you're 15? Unquote. Contemporary social media didn't exist in the way back of 2002. So Max spent his time on forums dedicated to a single topic, or else loading the full homepages of magazines in lieu of direct links to stories. Quote, people our age are lucky we got that, he says. I think it helped us learn to seek out information on our own and not just like what's popular. So Max is 28. Max became interested in the usual gateway drugs of men's issues: paternity rights, the selective service. So these are the issues that they're worried about: paternity rights, selective service, requirements that mothers sue for child support before seeking state assistance. The term men's rights activist, MRA, wasn't one he encounters in those days. He still says he prefers thinking of himself as a humanist. Putting men rights in the name is a deliberate response to feminism, I think, because feminists claim to be about everybody, but really they're about women first. So the MRA name is kind of trolling them, I guess, unquote. I asked him if it's such a bad thing for feminism to be primarily concerned with the interest of women. Quote, maybe 100 years ago, he says, but like in 2014, women have all kinds of advantages that men don't. And the reporter says, such as, and Max says, quote, I just don't like this us versus them. So this, Max says, is why he has been a capital letters MRA since at least 2010, but he is aware of the broad brush he is self-applying, and there are several things he's quick to say he isn't. He is not a pickup artist. He says he is not a red pillar. He is not a man going on his own way. These distinctions are important within the labyrinth network of reactionary masculinity movements, and confusing one with another is as easy and potentially treacherous as similar conflations between factions of the left. I don't imagine tribalism pays much mind to politics. It's only that when Max closes his laptop, he re-enters the world heir to every privilege the nation can afford, the variously malign social justice activists he makes fun of on our Tumblr in action have no such refuge. There are some other things Max is proud to be. He is an outspoken atheist and an active libertarian. The contours are the same. A proactive anti-clericalism and a distaste for regulatory apparatus couched in a vague sense that this distaste constitutes a moral stance. He uses really big words, but yeah. So any questions so far? Okay. See, this trinity is not uncommon. A survey taken last year of the men's rights subreddit found that 94% of their membership identified as atheists. I found that really surprising. 94% of the men's rights activists identified as atheists. I guess I expected more, Republican evangelicals on there. And so I was really surprised when it was 94% of their membership identified as atheist or religiously indifferent. Another broader study of the men's rights movement on Reddit found that 84% identified as strongly conservative, with particular policy preferences along a libertarian, not traditional bent. For those of us hailing from the nominal left, these associations have at times felt unnatural. Right-wingers using the rhetoric of social justice to argue for the traditional status of men, all the while eschewing in a way more typical of the left, the patriarchal religious institutions that have classically underpinned these values. When Max speaks about one ideology, he can hardly help bringing in the others. For him, they are all related, distinct expressions of the same worldview. And I can't exactly understand the reporter, but it kind of sounds like he was surprised too. That because he's talking about the patriarchal religious institutions, like maybe he expected Max to be in that worldview also, or more religious. But so we're all surprised. So on our first night, any questions or comments so far? On our first night, I asked him if there was ever a God in his life. We have ventured at last into a deliberate political conversation. Quote, This is God right here, he says, after slamming down a shot of Fireball. He is surprised that I want to discuss religion and politics, but not disappointed. He seems eager to get into these subjects. Quote, I think religion is probably one of the biggest threats to society, Max says. I think feminism and aestheticism and all of that, it's not explicitly about God, but it's definitely the same religious impulse, you know? Unquote. For Max, religion is something of a starter pack for a lifelong indoctrination into big lies. Quote, I know it isn't realistic or anything, but I think if we got rid of religion, that whole kind of way of thinking about things where you just subscribe to what you're told, where you believe these ridiculous statistics about women or in stuff like the wage gap, unquote, Max has a very long explanation of the wage gap myth, one that seems cobbled together from multiple readings of a few different blog posts. Quote, I just think the willingness to believe anything starts when you're a kid with Jesus. And it sets you up to be that way your whole life about everything. When I was a kid, I would have called it conformist, but that sounds kind of lame, right? But that idea, unquote. For me, it would be the willingness to believe everything started as a kid believing in Santa Claus. Okay, so he orders us another round and continues on with what has become a familiar line from men's rights activists or, quote, new atheists or libertarians. The explicit claim that they are the last remaining purveyors of reason. Quote, they just won't use logic. I'm just arguing logically. I'm only interested in the evidence, unquote. You can't scroll down a comment section without flashing past a few of these, and they are tribal markers, not real claims. Quote, I mean, it's ridiculous that these people go on about how I have so much power because I'm a white dude, unquote. Max continues, quote, like Americans would rather elect a gay Muslim philanderer president than an atheist. Libertarians are treated like a joke. If you think people are mean to feminists on Twitter, you should see the stuff people say about MRAs, or just like, you know, die white cis scum die, unquote. He laughs, but it feels deliberate. Otherwise, he might sound like he was getting worked up. After I pause, quote, like, if I'm privileged to have had parents who encouraged me to think for myself. Max says, this is in a tone more serious than his usual dorm room bull session effect, but the smile comes back quickly. Quote, I guess I'm oh so oppressed then, huh? Unquote. For all his derision toward the, quote, professional victimhood, unquote, of feminists, there's something a little less than sarcastic in Max's own sense of oppression. Hard-pressed on the social justice left is to admit any advantage the West these last decades has seen the rhetorical value of victimized stance, the irresistible cudgel of, quote, I am oppressed and this is my experience and you cannot speak to it because you do not know, unquote, is valid enough, of course, especially in those cases where ordinary enculturation does not provide natural empathy towards some suspect class. But it is a selective cudgel, too, especially alluring when it can be claimed without any of the lived experience that makes marginalization a lonely making sort of suffering. American Christians are persecuted now. Men are the ones being squelched by feminism. White Americans are victims of reverse discrimination. The victim card is a child of the 70s and 40 years out who wouldn't use it, no matter how disconnected from reality. We are typically aghast when reactionaries accuse the maligned of perniciously employ this rhetoric and unity, but they are not wrong to see how the trick might be exploited. The irony is only that they know this possibility in virtue of their own projection. Any comments so far? For all Max's talk of equality, for all of Max's talk of equal opportunity, quote, it isn't the same as equality of outcome, unquote, he quotes. For all his dismissal of those who blame institutional inhibitors of happiness, quote, structural oppression might as well be Jesus. He's there. You just can't see it. But trust me, I'm a priest of Tumblr, and we can see it, you stupid heathens, unquote. For all his casual derision toward the very notion of groups who might be justified in feeling that the world was not made for them, he is entirely possessed by the idea that it is men like him who bear the true brunt of society's hatred, and that it is they, not the feminists or the statists or the faithful, who see the true extent of this structural injustice. For Max, it's all a crusade. The struggle against the church, the state, the women, it is a battle about genuine issues, issues maligned by a majority too easily beholden to the prevailing taste consensus. The stakes are high and immediate. Persuasion by comment section possible, and moreover important because the trouble with most people is that they, quote, haven't really thought about it for 2 seconds, unquote. The whole trinity flows from the sense of displacement. Libertarianism follows from recognizing of a colluding party system within a power-hungry state too quick to shut down big questions. Men's rights activism follows from the bizarre misapprehension fueled by a disconnect between the opinions of visible intellectuals and the average populace. That feminism has reached suffocating heights of power. He is a rebel with one cause in 3 bodies. And the pushback from friends, from me, from the nation's opinion apparatus itself, only therefore fuels his indignation toward a society too willing to neglect inconvenient truths about the world. In activist circles of any kind, it is common to hear that injustice is a kind of sight that cannot be unseen. All of it seemed so hyperbolic until I started noticing it. Now I notice it everywhere. Now I notice it in everything. The it is typically some kind of institutional bias. The ways in which women are routinely encouraged to defer to male judgment. The way in which race, without overt malice, permeates even simple American interactions. Before we were post-gender and post-racial, without need of equal rights amendment, on track toward total marriage equality. Then you hear something or live it or read it or see it. The world today is now more like history, and the motives of the people in it are more suspect than ever before. Okay, so now we caught up to where we were, and we're good. We're doing good on time. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay. So just for those who are showing up, we're reading the homework that's for April 1st, the April 1st Vespers class. It's an article titled "The Men Who Hate Women on Internet." I think that was the right title. And it's a 15-page article, but we're halfway through it, so we're doing good. So reviewing my notes from my first night speaking with Max, I become more confident that his life is some strange inversion of the same epiphany. One day, he is comfortable as a man and comfortable with what masculinity means in the world. The next, he can see behind the veil, and all that goes away. Social justice through a mirror, darkly. Men are the ones subject to genuine oppression, the ones whose issues are taken as uninteresting and unimportant. They are the ones taking terrible jobs and being drafted, committing suicide at incredible rates, losing their children, their spouses, and their homes while nobody else seems to care, shouting in the wilderness while feminist majority squelches their dissent. I am a victim. So I am not the first to notice this. Last year, John Herman noticed the same inversion in the all. Quote, a great number of men online and off understand feminism as aggression, he said. They feel as though the perception of their actions as threats is itself a threat. In other words, they too believe that unsolicited public attention is inherently aggressive, but only when that attention takes the form of criticism and only when it comes from women. They live this belief on the streets where they are nearly unaccountable and argue it online where they are totally accountable. Looking at my notebook, one observation underlined at the time stands out. Quote, Max says he needs online MRA communities because on normal internet, he gets shouted down and talked over. Unquote. A different kind of activist might call that a safe space. If men's rights activism has a glorious dynamo, a kind of central activist figurehead, it is Paul Elam, the founder and publisher of A Voice for Men. The website is one of the oldest, and if there is such a thing, most respected hubs for MRA activity, men's rights activism. Elam and his staff do, at the very least, engage in genuine advocacy on behalf of men. Moreover, they don't typically stray past boorishness and into outright campaigns of harassment, although I cannot help feeling myopic in citing this fact as some kind of high water mark amongst the MRA set. I send him an email and he writes back quickly. We arrange a call. Like Max, Elam sees his issues as a crusade. His atheism as important, his politics as moral in their anti-socialism. He was a substance abuse counselor by trade. It was in this context that he began to see. He remembers the first time working for a men's treatment facility in Houston, waiting in the hall with an invited speaker, a woman about to go in and address the clientele. Quote, I was standing outside the group room and we were waiting for her to go in, just chatting for a moment about our work, he says. And just before going into the group, which she was being paid quite a bit of money to do, she says, quote, one of my favorite things in the world is to take men's macho bullshit and shove it down their throat, unquote. And then, Elam said, I saw a lot of this in the treatment field. Elam says, it's just she said it in such a particularly stark and direct way. At that point, I thought, something needs to be done about this, unquote. The trouble continued. Quote, I went to the administration about that particular incident, Elam explains, and everyone who worked at that facility looked at me like I was nuts and said, what's the problem? That's how pervasive this issue is. Elam could see the truth. Nobody else could see it. While the issues of paternity rights and the destruction of the family would come later, Elam's transition from counselor to pseudo-civil rights hero grew naturally out of his prior life. He recites a litany of charges against modern psychotherapy. It's anti-masculine focus on effusively articulated feelings. If one dismisses for a moment the bizarre unreality of men subject to brutal gendered discrimination, it doesn't sound terribly different in sense or scope of conspiracy than the complaints of feminist academics so often mocked by men of Elam's kind. Quote, if you want to bet that this woman identified as a feminist, I can tell you for a fact that she did. And she wasn't the only one who talked that way in the field. I do think that is abusive, he tells me. When you send the message to your clients that they are either failing or succeeding based on your expectations of a stereotype, unquote, through a mirror darkly, Elam says it is his group, not organized feminism, that is earnestly engaged in destroying traditional gender roles. It reminds me of a Pascal aphorism from the Pensies, quote, how is it that a lame man does not annoy us while a lame mind does? Because a lame man recognizes that we are walking straight, while a lame mind says that it is we who are limping. That's interesting. So, any questions so far? Okay, Elam isn't without his objectivity. Unlike Max, he knows, for example, that his position is a rare one. Elam is not convinced that most people, normal people, the women in his office, if there were women in his office, take his crusades as common sense and only don't say so out of fear. His manner gives rise to a suspicion that he has been lonely a long time, not the literal way, but self-consciously stranded in a shrinking section of the world. He is committed in part to his work because if more ground is lost, he will be lonelier still. If more ground is lost, there may not be room at all. Men are suffering, he says, he is suffering, but he doesn't say that outright. All of it breeds a certain paranoia, one I encountered in all the men I spoke to, a feeling likely justified by the ordinary reaction to men's rights activism, that outsiders, especially outsiders writing for mainstream publications, are not to be trusted. That they agreed to speak to me at all remains surprising, especially in Max's case. He is friendly, willing to sit down, but insistent that his identity be protected. He seems like so many zealots to believe at once that he is righteous and vital, and also that speaking out under his own name will bring unsavory consequences beyond his willingness to suffer. At one point during our conversation, Elam says, quote, I'm just going to be frank with you. I've been through countless interviews with the media, unquote. As a result, he says he understands why I need to ask him questions for a mainstream read feminist sensibility. But, quote, in a society that when we even try to talk about the issues, people are screaming bloody hell, trying to shut us down, calling us hate mongers and everything else, trying to silence us. That seems to me to be a very skewed point of view from which to be questioned, unquote. Despite this, he is nothing but polite. Indeed, none of the men I spoke to about these issues are anything but friendly, almost eager to persuade. I suspect that this is because I am, despite everything, a straight white man. To Elam and to Max, I am a heretic, but not an infidel. I can still be saved. I see Max again a few nights after our first meeting. I relate some of my conversation with Elam, and Max is quick to echo his bafflement. Quote, I mean, people keep saying we're full of hate. We're just these angry, hateful dudes, you know? Like we can't get laid. We hate women, all of that. And we come back with statistics like rational argument, like an actual debate, and are like, no, listen, here's this and this and this with men. And here's like the logical fallacy in your argument. And they just call you like a cishet shitlord and move on, unquote. There's a temptation brought on by the claustrophobia of extended conversation, a bit by empathy, and a bit by drink, to be taken in by the spirit of the argument. Men face certain social difficulties, idiosyncratic to our sex. And while they are not systemic in the way that women's issues are, nor half so severe, I find it easy to sympathize with Max's frustration. In the bar, insulated as we are, when he begins talking about just wanting human rights, quote, just wanting human rights, I can only see his face, hear the expression in his voice, connect instinctively to that face and voice, in part because they are well-mannered and in part because they are like my own. In that moment, I can, if I like, forget that these issues, legitimate enough on their face, are carried out from a place of one-upmanship, that our expressions, except in rare cases, are solely as debating points, hurled between invective and harassment, and the oldest hack tropes about women's bodies and choices. I can forget those things if I like. I'm only a heretic. Quote, I know this is like almost a Fox News cliche way of saying it, but feminism and a lot of this stuff has been like a fundamental transformation of American society. We can't even see how far it's gone yet. He says, I just think it's important to be wary of that and point out when you think things are getting too far from the truth, unquote. He is almost starry-eyed while saying it, his voice quieter, slightly higher. Sincerity isn't quite the word so much as performance. Max knows how to tone the romantic's innermost profundity. Perhaps he doesn't do it consciously, but he's stealing from the movies all the same. At one ideological, forceful to the point of edgy outsider charm, and eminently reasonable, asking only for a consensus over what any fool can see. It isn't surprising that this seduces so many young men. It's all terribly reasonable until it isn't. This night corresponds with a particularly bad episode of police misconduct in Ferguson. And at some point, we stopped talking about the plight of men to watch a news live stream on my phone. Max's reaction is immediate. Quote, this is crazy, he says a few times. Quote, it's police brutality. I know people who say this isn't about race, but I don't get it. Like, this is obvious racism, unquote. A promising sign, but then after a minute, quote, man, feminists wish the cops treated them like this, then they'd actually be oppressed, unquote. There's always another shoe with Max. Okay, I say about halfway through our second night, quote, let's pretend for a minute that I take all of your issues seriously. How good an actor are you? He interrupts, laughing. Quote, let's say I believe men are maligned, women are taking advantage of them and profiting from it. And I believe all of this, and I come to you, a men's rights activist, and I say I want to get involved and help. Shouldn't I be concerned that a lot of people on your side don't seem to be doing legal or political work so much as sending death threats? No, Max says, the extreme behavior is mainstream in feminism these days, not in the men's rights movement. Elam claims much the same thing. Speaking about the men's rights conference he organized last summer. He explains, quote, feminist activists have come out and pulled fire alarms, harassed attendees, interrupted and protested. When we had a conference on men's issues in Detroit, there was a demonstration, pressure on the hotel to shut us down. We eventually had to change venues. How much of what is really going on are you paying attention to, sir? Unquote. It's fascinating that they would compare this, pulling fire alarms, harassing attendees, and interrupting the protest and protesting against death threats and rape. Okay, I don't know. Just a thoughts. Anybody have any comments?
No.
Max never asked me that question outright, but I can hear it, minus the sir, beneath a lot of what he says. I ask about the harassment of feminists, of women in general, on the street, in their homes, by classmates and strangers. How much is he paying attention to, for that matter? He shrugs it off. Quote, I don't really see any of that stuff. He says, I mean, I'm sure it happens, but it's not like organized anyway. Guys catcalling don't have meetings to plan it. Years ago, I was standing on a metro platform with a woman I knew. It was around 3 a.m. We had walked a mile to a train. She says it's the first time she's gone that stretch of road without being catcalled. I asked why. The answer is so obvious. She says most men won't do it if the woman looks like she's with her owner. So the guys won't catcall if the woman looks like she's with her owner.
Sorry. Jumping in with you guys. Owner.
Yeah, it's just craziness, right? Other headlines coincide with our time together. James Foley is beheaded by ISIS. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas breaks down. Max blames both on religious extremism and says he can't understand why, quote, the good Muslims don't denounce terrorism. Extreme behavior is a sore spot for any movement, and nobody is more forgiving than one's own. Max concedes that some MRAs and associated activists go too far. Quote, some people DOXX feminist and call, I don't know what that means. Does anybody DOXX feminist and call their houses?
It's doxing. I remember looking it up, and if somebody remembers it quicker than I do, I was trying to clean my glasses. Doxing. I'll try to find it for you while you read.
Okay, great.
Because I remember looking it up, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
But it was something that they do to the women.
So some people doxing feminists and call their houses, he tells me. That isn't cool. You can criticize these people, you can try to debate them, but threats are way out there, unquote. So does he denounce the violent elements on any of these forums? He has tweeted unkind things to feminists. Does that encourage the ones who cross the line? So, quote, what's the point, Max asked. I mean, it's only a couple of guys, really. It's super fringe. They're not going to stop just because I say so. He fiddles with his burger. You just have to develop a thick skin and try to ignore it. The feminist, me, all of us, just ignore the crazy shit, unquote. So just ignore the death threats.
I put doxing in there.
Okay, great. Let's see. So search for and publish private or identifying information about a particular individual on the internet, typically malicious intent. I'm going to stick that in my document because because I keep forgetting what it is. Here. Thank you. Thanks for doing that.
Mhm.
So near the end of our call, Elam had this to say, quote, "Of course there's anger out there. I've never seen a social movement, including women's liberation, the Black civil rights movement, gay rights, that did not involve some anger. So this whole idea that, oh my God, they're angry is rooted in the very monastery and the very bigotry that we're trying to address," unquote. Perhaps Elam is simply more self-aware than Max is, but it is difficult to hear them talk this way and maintain credulity. It all sounds a little, I'm maligned and I'm oppressed and society is too backward for the revolution I'm bringing, but I don't say so. I asked Max if he has a girlfriend. Yes, he says, that they've been seeing each other a few months. A couple of weeks go by. Vague plans had kept Max busy on the weekends. I've traveled out of town to report on another story. In September now, and we are sitting in Max's apartment. His having a girlfriend is curious. Earlier in the evening, Max had told me, or rather had paraphrased, perhaps unconsciously, from a dozen articles and frat house bull sessions, that the base tragedy of feminism was the transformation of American women, their entitlement, their schizophrenic effect toward the dominance of men. The schizophrenic.
What a horrible thing to say.
Yeah,
Wow.
So they have a schizophrenic effect toward the dominance of men. So meaning he agrees that men are supposed to be dominant. Even the ones who are not feminists have been spoiled by the culture like male allies. In the eyes of internet feminists, ostensibly uncorrupted women are valuable, but often suspect. Uncorrupted women. So women who still believe that men should be dominant. At any rate, he likes this girl. She might be marriage material, he says. Quote, "Are you surprised?" he asked. The reporter says, "By what?" And Max says, "That I have a girlfriend." And the reporter, "No." I look out the window and consider that the view of the skyline alone might be worth a night in bed with a proverbial can of paint. I don't know what that means. Quote, "Yes, you are. Come on. You don't think women could possibly respect themselves and want to be with some evil sexist pig like me," unquote. He is teasing me. Joviality is one of Max's preferred diffusion tactics. Taking on a deliberate inflated voice when directly addressing our differences is designed to produce an effect whereby we might wink at one another. We are both metacognizant. We both know the cliches about the other side. It isn't entirely ineffective. Max is naturally charismatic, and I am not surprised he has a girlfriend, only that he wants one. He looks down at his phone and smiles. Something on Twitter. He types, "I wonder what kind of charisma he's employing there." Quote, "I thought American women were all ruined," I say. Max, "Not all of them. You know what I mean, just a lot. And you can never know. So it's hard to trust or invest in anybody long enough to find out." Reporter, "This girl isn't a feminist though, I assume." Max, "No, that you can see a mile away." Reporter, "So she's more traditional?" Max, "No, I'm not like looking for a housewife." That Max is not seeking a 1950s fantasy is important to him. He asked me to say so explicitly. Max says, "So she's cool," he tells me. "She doesn't have time for that social justice warrior stuff. She's in law school." He shows me a picture. I'm not much for intuiting whole personalities from photographs, but I agree she has a look. an irrepressible appearance of sincerity without the usual attendant and experience. She's capable. It's in her brow line somehow. Before meeting with Max for the third time, do you have any questions, anybody? Okay. Before meeting with Max for the third time, I had placed another call to a more public face of men's empowerment. This time it was to Darius Valizada, a writer popularly known as Rush V. He made his name as a pickup artist, one of the professional sort, a peddler of the best underhanded, quote, one weird tricks for seducing any woman. He is the author of more than a dozen self-published books, each of which offers tips for picking up the women in a country he has visited. The best way to exploit the insecurities of Poles evidently diverges at a book's length from the ideal manipulation of Norwegians. Rush is the owner of a website as well, Return of Kings, with the tagline, quote, for masculine men, unquote. What dignity Elam's a voice for men retained does not interest kings. This is a site that revels in its aggression. Looking late last year, without venturing past the first page, I found the following headlines. Quote, street harassment is a myth invented by socially retarded white women. Another quote, Twitter is partnering with SJWs to prevent women from facing consequences.
What were SJWs? Do you remember?
No.
Okay.
SJWs. No.
I think the thing that bothered me about this, the whole Gamergate thing, and it's not just Gamer, but the incels as well, is how it reveals their intent.
Yeah.
Their, deliberate intent against women.
Yeah. To be the dominant, when you say their intent, what?
Social justice warrior, Luke said. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, because he
Thank
did
you.
refer to it up there.
Okay.
Intent meaning because my own experience of being played with, my mind played with and messed with and along the way and all that, but how intentional it is to when they, I think especially in the incels one, what the internet did for them, to where they could gather and have their, what's the word for it? Their forum, that's not the word I'm looking for it, but what is it when you gather together and you get your social support, what have you, lacking the right word, but where they grow and feed off of each other to participate in this behavior. Empowering.
Right. And enforcing what their thoughts,
Yeah. And it's people's lives that they're hurt.
Yeah.
We got
Does anybody
background.
else have, Yeah, we have. Does anybody else have some comments?
Thank you, Luke. I thought I recognized it, but couldn't remember.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Oh, it says it right there, social justice warrior.
Oh, no, I put that in there because.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see you do that. Okay. I thought, wow, pretty bad.
Let's see, I think I left off in the sentence. I found the following headlines. Street harassment is a myth invented by socially retarded white women. Another quote, Twitter is partnering with social justice warrior to prevent women from facing consequences. Another quote, 5 lines that potential wives cannot cross. Really? 5 lines that potential wives cannot cross. I'm particularly haunted by number 5. You have left your old family and joined mine. This is not a men's rights magazine, but something more pure, an expression of rage, admittedly proudly, against the prevailing tide of feminism.
So is he saying number 5 was 5 lines, right? I'm particularly haunted by number 5. So number 5 is you have left your old family and joined mine. In other words,
Yeah,
I'm your owner, and etc. I know that the situation that I was in, but years ago, he was really jealous of me having time with my mom, and eventually it got to the place where I didn't spend time with my family because didn't know what it was gonna set him off and cause a problem.
right.
So it affects more than the woman, it affects the whole family.
Right. The family, the friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
friends. Yeah, I had friends that were that I wouldn't spend time with. I didn't want to hear what they had to say, you know?
So it puts the female, and I'm sure it happens for men too. I mean, but it puts that other person in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it puts a huge dent in their confidence in their reality. I can't completely speak to that, you know, because I've never been physically abused by a guy, like in a relationship, just mentally. I don't know. Okay, so now that we bring that up, I'm not going to go there, but apparently I have, now that I think about it. Okay, so let's see. Quote, I think there are 2 problems going on right now. Rush told me, first, if you're a man, society has no role for you except listen to what women want. Second, related, is that culture is telling men to hate themselves. Oh man, our whole lives we've been told to hate ourselves. I was born told to hate myself.
So if I'm reading that correctly, they're like being victims, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
They're turning around and acting like what our independence and voice is now causing them to be the victims.
Exactly. When all along from birth, you know, we've been told to hate ourselves and always, you know, listen to the guy, always do whatever he says, and now they're the victims. And we've been putting up with this for our whole lives. It's just ridiculous. Okay, deep breath. Of the 3 men I talked to, Rush is by far the most charming. He has none of Elon's middle-aged weariness, nor the irregular intensity of cadence that makes one think of sandwich board prophets. What Max possesses in natural charisma, Rush has given a practiced sophistication. He is funny and acutely aware that he goes much further in building rapport with a potentially hostile journalist than Elon's bitter complaining about countless interviews gone wrong ever could. Rush's story is typical for the movement. He sees a culture laid to waste by contemporary values, by feminism, by feminism and the left. The decline is existential, robbing not only men but women of purpose and therefore happiness. Quote, there was a study, it said that women are less happy now than at any other time. He says, he's referring to the paradox of declining female happiness. An influential 2009 paper published in the American Economic Journal. This was based on surveys. I don't know how accurate it is, but you see women who are addicted to their phones. They're having to work in a job that, let's be honest, is a glorified way to push paper. Do they really feel happy? Do they seem happy? Unquote. I suggest that happiness is fungible I don't know what that word is. He uses a lot of big words with no sentence. I'm just going to say, I don't know. I suggest that happiness is fungible, or I
I'll
know,
look it up.
huh? Okay.
I'll look it up.
That paper pushing may be a genderless misery. Quote, are you telling me that a woman now is actually happier working for a boss in a corporate office who can fire her just because the quarterly report was bad, more than serving her husband in a comfortable home? He says, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it that women and anyone is amazingly happy because they can buy a new iPhone every year. If we define happiness by being a consumer zombie, then yes, maybe that's right. But anyone who has chased that knows there's no gold at the end of the rainbow. Okay, so fungible, thank you. Able to replace or be replaced. Or be replaced by another identical item, mutually interchangeable. I'm going to put that in because I can't remember that word. Thank you. He doesn't make a bad sophomore year Marxist, Rush. I repeat the sentiment to Max at his apartment. He says it sounds a little lefty, but he gets the drift. Quote, yeah, sure, he tells me, but like people are adults, they can make their own choices about what to buy. Unquote. Max and I have this conversation while playing his new Xbox. He points out after about an hour that he has only put out games specifically criticized by Anita Sarkeesian. Quote, I thought Rouge V was more of a pickup, screw the family, get laid sort of dude, Max says. The reporter, as did I. For all his writing about how to sleep with multiple women, Rouge says it would be better the old way, the way where men had one partner and one woman had one partner. But he adds, quote, it's easy to look back into the past and extract the best things that they did and hope and wish that we had that. Of course, as humankind marches on, we can never pick and choose. So I'm thinking, what is the best deal that a man can do where he doesn't get screwed, where he doesn't have his life ruined, where he doesn't get imprisoned for something like a false rape accusation, unquote. In Rouge V's ideal world, there would be no need for men like Rouge. He claims no deep biological imperative beneath his seduction tactics, only a culture falling apart in the West. Marriage is dying as women are no longer beholden to the pillars of its stability, hooking up, going out, getting laid. These are just distractions, perhaps the best distractions still available, and Rouge fancies himself pragmatic. I hang up the phone thinking this is all a bit more fatalistic than I had thought. Relating this all to Max in his apartment, I wonder what his girlfriend thinks of all of this. Do you talk to her about your views? I asked. Max, not so much, he says. This is peculiar construction for anyone, especially for someone with Max's instinct for putting others at ease. Reporter, are you afraid to? Max, no, he says, no, of course not. In the elevator, a moment later, quote, I mean, don't get me wrong, she knows where I stand, unquote. In June of last year, Times' Jessica Roy attended the first annual men's rights conference outside Detroit, a conference Elon was central in organizing. Among the litany of predictable observations, the destructive politics, the hostility and rage, the incomprehensible self-pity, Roy reported encountering a feeling she did not anticipate. Quote, what I didn't expect, she writes, was how it would make me feel, sad and angry and helpless and determined all at the same time. Moreover, I didn't expect to talk to so many men in genuine need of a movement that supports them, a movement that looks completely different from the one that had fomented online and was stoked by many who spoke at this 3-day conference, unquote. When Max and I were children, we would have looked the same, middle class, semi-suburban, precocious with stable families and access to college prep education. We might have had similar opinions too. Max comes from a family of nominal Democrats. He was one himself, to the extent a child can be, and still is to the extent that he voted for President Obama in 2008 before switching to Kerry Johnson in 2012. We aren't so different now, really, except in our work, our politics, our culture, and our fundamental outlook. That sounds like a lot of differences. This occurs to me on our first night together. When did the divergence begin? It is a question I have asked before of high school classmates now married, of old friends, of a teenage drug dealer I knew who by 19 had been declared technically dead on 3 separate occasions. So what happened? Social media came, perhaps. Max sees our age cohort as the last without all its information curated by Facebook and Twitter. This is true, but because of this, we were also the last insulated without conscious effort from the inevitable exposure to marginalized voices brought by social media. Talk to high school students now. They've heard critical theory about gender and society and race that many of us, even slightly older, did not hear until the world made us. They accept it as obvious, not revolutionary. The difference between Max and me is whether we take this to be a bad thing. We were different. Max and I were both adults, or nearly so, before it became clear that we were living in a time when no matter how we felt about it, the theoretical foundation of our privilege was, if not nearly crumbling, at least suspect, even to the mainstream. Normative male dominance is a legacy best disposed of, but that does not mean it is not the norm or that it's lost, especially to those raised to expect its constant comfort is not a precious and frightening possibility. For some, even little tremors are enough to set you on uncertain footing. Some stumbling men get angry even when they've got a girlfriend, finance, job, and $1 million view of River North. They turn to the crusade. They cast themselves the victims. This should not surprise us. Some men, some small but loud and dangerous number, will become violent by instinct, threatened by any rustling in the trees. Out with the bad, but Roy puts a finger on the absence. What good will come in after it? What kind of movement will support kings reduced suddenly to paupers? This is not our first concern, of course. It's not something that lends itself to sympathy or pity, but it should provoke some empathy. At one point in our conversation, Rush pauses for a minute, then says this, quote, "When you teach men to hate themselves without giving them a role model, without giving them a masculine idea of who to be, how can we be surprised that men are just lost? They're completely lost right now, and no one is doing anything to solve this problem," unquote. Months after my last encounter with Max, I was in a bar in Chicago explaining this story to a friend. Gamergate had escalated. Sarkeesian had just appeared on the covert report, quote, "So is this guy Max one of these people making bomb threats?" unquote, my friend asked. "I don't think so," I say, "but I don't know. He was nice to me, but..." So I decided to call. I walk outside and reach him. By the sound from the other line, he too is at a bar somewhere. He says, "Hold on," to somebody beside him, and a moment later is outside too, on some other street in some similar part of the city. He says, no, he's cut it out with tweeting angrily at feminists. It's gone too far, he says. He likes debate, and maybe when things calm down, he'll get back into it. "Are you afraid of how this is all making your movement look?" I ask. He says, "No, These guys are weird video game nerds anyway. They're just upset. They aren't fighting for a real cause beyond their own hurt feelings. I ask if he feels bad about acting out in the past, if he regrets anything he said to anyone online, if he thinks he is part of the reason that ordinary women have been fleeing from their homes. Quote, I don't know, he tells me. I don't feel great about it. Seriously, dude, I was thinking about when we were hanging out, and I don't think it's the best way to persuade people on social media and stuff, you know? And quote, sure, then why did he do it at all? Quote, I don't know, man. You know, it's all so quick. You see something and it bothers you and you feel annoyed, and like without thinking about it, you just like lash out at it. Shitty Facebook comment or tweet or whatever. We've all been there. You're like, right then, pissed or whatever. It's just an in the moment thing. You feel bad about it the next day. Reporter, you do? Max, sure. Reporter, do you apologize? Max, for being critical? No, I mean, they were still wrong, unquote. The end. It was a very interesting, enlightening article. And thanks for all for listening to the end. So this is an article that Elder Tess will comment on April 1st, this Friday, for Vespers. And also the libertarianism. I know we read that last Wednesday, about libertarianism, and she's been going over it. So those will be two of the things. So comments, debates, questions. Anybody?
I was reading the Wikipedia page last week on this, and it was I didn't get all the way through it. It was a really long page, but it said that Adam Baldwin, he's one of the actors, right? One of the Baldwin brothers.
Yeah.
For those that know, that he was the one that actually created the Gamergate hashtag.
Oh.
But what I didn't know, I mean, did he create it for this purpose? I didn't get that far. I mean, I don't know if it was created for that purpose or it just got latched onto. I don't know if anybody knows.
I don't know. Which one's Alec? There's like 5 of them.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 of them, I think.
At least 3 of them are actors.
Yeah.
And one of them killed a person.
One of them what?
One of them is the one that killed that you know,
the blanks or whatever that were put
Yeah.
into that gun. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Alec Baldwin.
That one's Alec. Okay.
Yeah. Back in the day, long time ago, in the TV watching, one of the programs I watched, he played an abusive husband, really violent, abusive husband.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, it was just to have people deliberately. I was thinking too when you were reading that, when it was trying to remember what it said, the second to the last page or so, but I was going through it in my mind about how they become the victims.
Uh-huh.
They take on, they cry they're the victims. And I was kind of thinking about it when it comes to like Black Lives Matters. Okay, there's a serious issue and people get fed up, and a cause, comes together and they fight, they stand up, they fight, they protest. And then what does the other side do? They turn around and copy when they're not the abused ones. They're the abusers, they're the perpetrators, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What she was talking about, what Elder Tess was talking about in the presentation. So they're the perpetrators that become the victims.
Right.
And so you see the same thing here. They're the perpetrators, and then they take the role of victim.
Right. Yeah, I don't get it.
It's really a sick behavior.
Yeah.
No accountability for your actions, but also it's a mindset to to even think this way. That, you know, for a woman to stand up for her rights, to stand up for herself, to use her voice, and to not tolerate sexist behavior, how it turns around and they put it back on the woman.
Right. Yeah, it's just this is craziness. It's hard to fathom. And they make themselves, you know, not only the victim, but also they say they're the logical ones. They're the ones with the logical arguments, that they bring logical arguments to the table and everybody shuts them down. You know, they have statistics and stuff like that. But I'm like, you know, I can't imagine where they're getting their statistics that support their theories, their logical, their logical truth, which is not true, their real truth, but what they believe, you know. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you can make up all sorts of stuff. Everybody does.
It's the whole patriarchal structure that they have the right, they're entitled.
Right.
And women are supposed to know their place.
Yeah.
And when women don't know their place, you know, I'm speaking for as them, when women don't know their place, then they react.
Right. Because they're threatened. It's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And this behavior we've been taught, I mean, to look for, that when there's a threat, then they'll lash out.
I don't know why this one bothers me so much more than some of the other ones we've read, but the incel one's really bad too. But these are just women that two of them were game developers.
Right.
And I think it's hard to fathom that there's men like that. I know that they're like this because I've had my own experiences with them, but to actually have that attitude in this day and age, but it's coming to that, you know, it's all coming to a head. But to have that attitude that the gaming industry is a man's world and games are designed for men by men, and they've got how would you word it? They've got sex interlaced through the games, and dominance, male dominance will interlaced and violence through the games, and women develop games, and they act this way. That all of this came from women, if I'm understanding correctly, came from women, to these two women that developed games, and the other one, her name was Sarkeesian. She wasn't a game developer, if I remember right.
Okay.
She was a feminist, if I think. It might have said it at the beginning. I think she was a feminist. And but it's like they have the right, you know what I mean?
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about lately the different situations that I've been in and the things that, so women like Anita Sarkeesian, to view Sarkeesian's feminist frequency videos after reading accounts of her harassment is because they went after her too. She was a feminist. She wasn't the game developer. Zoe and Briana were the game developers.
And so she wasn't even, they're not even radicals. They're just.
Yeah. No, they didn't have, The one of them, I don't remember if it was Zoe or Brianna, it probably said it in here somewhere, is the one that developed that game for off of some depression that she went through.
Oh, yeah, no, they didn't go into that detail.
Huh?
They didn't go into detail of what, who did what.
Or maybe I read it on the Wikipedia page. She developed a game that was about Zoe Quinn, an independent game developer, released Depression Quest, a text-focused game designed to convey the experience of depression through a series of fictional scenarios, based in part on Quinn's own experience with the illness. The game received some positive reviews in the gaming media, but faced backlash online from gamers who disliked its departure from typical game formats emphasizing violence and skill, and who opposed political intrusions into gamer culture. So it's a political intrusion into the gamer culture. Quinn was subjected to several months of harassment after its release, including rape and death threats. Quinn documented the harassment she received and spoke openly to the media about it, which led to even more intense abuse against her, including the posting of her home address online. And that would be the doxing. She ultimately, because I think that's what the doxing was, is posting, posting information on them online. She ultimately fled her house out of fear for her safety. If I understand correctly, the internet, how do you say, the internet, what's the word for it? Plays a big role in it getting to that place. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to think of the words to put it in. Because they were able to communicate differently with the internet.
Because they can say anything and
Yeah.
it sees who you are. You can say anything, you can, and there's no consequences for your actions.
Exactly. Thank you. I was wondering, what were the consequences for that happening with them being harassed?
You have to read more on it. I was going to read a little bit more about it, but I don't know that we'll get to that part. But
Well, we have 20 minutes and we're done with the article.
yeah, I can read some of this if you want. I'll pull it up to the share screen if you want.
Okay, I'll stop share.
So I was just reading here. This is Zoe, and I was right here. The controversies and events that would come to be known as Gamergate began in 2014, that we knew, as a personal attack on Quinn. So it began with an attack on her over this game, incited by a blog post by Quinn's former boyfriend, Aaron Jonzi, called the Zoe Post. It was a lengthy, detailed account of their relationship and breakup. So he posted this, right? Yeah, the Zoe Post. Let's see, a personal attack on her. Okay, the former boyfriend wrote what was called the Zoe Post. It was a lengthy, detailed account of their relationship and breakup that included copies of personal chat logs, emails, and text messages. So humiliating, publicly humiliating. The blog falsely implied that Quinn had a sexual relationship with Nathan Grayson, a reporter for the website Kotaku, in exchange for a favorable review of Depression Quest. Jonji later said that he had no evidence of a sexual conflict of interest on Quinn's part. Grayson never actually reviewed any of Quinn's games, so he made it all up. And his only Kotaku article mentioning her was published before their relationship began. I guess he didn't make it up because it sounds like it was a relationship. Nonetheless, as reported by the Daily Dot, gamers online used Jonji's blog to accuse Quinn without evidence of trading sex for professional advancement. A link to the blog that was posted to 4chan, where many users had previously been highly critical of Depression Quest, led to renewed attacks on Quinn. And after Jonji's blog post, Quinn and her family were subjected to virulent, often misogynistic harassment campaign. Online attackers of Quinn at first used the label Quinspiracy, later adopting the hashtag Gamergate after it was coined by actor Adam Baldwin, whose nearly 190,000 Twitter followers helped the spread of the hashtag. I'm assuming he was a part of it then. It says he coined the hashtag name. Harassment of Gamergate targets was coordinated via internet relay chat, spreading rapidly over image boards and forums like 4chan and Reddit. Less than 4 months after Gamergate began, Quinn's record of threats she had received had grown 1,000-fold. At a conference, Quinn said, "I used to go to the game events and feel like I was going home. Now it's just like any other of the people I'm currently in the room with ones that said they wanted to beat me to death. So there was a place where she was at home, and now it's like she's in a room with people that want to beat her to death. I think I read that correctly. One anonymous 4chan user threatened to give her a crippling injury that's never going to fully heal. Commentators both inside and outside the video game industry condemned the attacks against Quinn. The attacks included doxing, researching and broadcasting personally identifiable information about an individual, and hacking of her Tumblr, Dropbox, and Skype accounts. She was again subjected to rape and death threats. Quinn again fled her home to stay with friends. Quinn wrote that the internet spent the last month spreading my personal information around, sending me threats, hacking anyone suspected of being friends with me, calling my dad and telling him I'm a whore, sending nude photos of me to colleagues, and basically giving me the burn the witch treatment. So I don't know how much you want to go through this. What time is it? So Gamergate supporters subjected others to similar harassment, doxing, and death threats. Those who came to the victim's defense were ridiculed as white knights or social justice warriors. This characterization was intended, according to Heron, Belford, and Goker, to neutralize any opposition by questioning their motives. Shortly after the Gamergate hashtag was coined, video game developers Phil Fish had his personal information, including various accounts and passwords, hacked and publicly posted in retaliation for defending Quinn and attacking her detractors. The hacks and doxing also exposed documents relating to Fish's company, Polytron. As a result, Fish left the gaming industry and put Polytron up for sale, calling the situation unacceptable and saying it's not worth it. The campaign expanded to include renewed harassment of prominent feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian. Okay, the campaign expanded to include renewed harassment of prominent feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian, who had previously been a target of online harassment due in part to her YouTube video series, Tropes versus Women in Video Games, which analyzes sexist portrayals of women. After a new episode of Tropes versus Women was released on August 24th, 2014, Sarkeesian received rape and death threats, and private information, including her home address, was leaked. She was compelled to flee her home. At the XOXO Arts and Technology Conference in Portland, Oregon, she said in regard to the accusations that high-profile women were making up the threats against them, that one of the most radical things you can do is to actually believe women when they talk about their experiences. The perpetrators, Sarkeesian went on to say, do not see themselves as perpetrators at all. They see themselves as noble warriors. Sarkeesian canceled an October 2014 speaking appearance at Utah State University after the school received 3 anonymous threats, the second of which claimed affiliation with Gamergate. The initial threat proposed that a Montreal massacre-style attack will be carried out against the attendees, as well as the students and staff at the nearby Women's Center, alluding to the École Polytechnique massacre, the 1989 mass shooting motivated by anti-feminism. USU's president and provost released a joint statement saying that USU, in consultation with state and federal law enforcement agencies, had assessed that there was no credible threat to students, staff, or the speaker. Requests for additional security measures were declined because of Utah's open carry laws, leading to the cancellation. The threats drew the attention of mainstream media to the Gamergate situation. Nick Wingfield of the New York Times referred to the threat as the most noxious example of weeks-long campaign to discredit or intimidate outspoken critics of the male-dominated gaming industry and its culture. The Federal Bureau of Investigation investigated the threat to attack Sarkeesian and other Gamergate-related threats. The investigations, which were plagued with jurisdictional issues, ultimately closed with the FBI failing to identify the perpetrators of some threats and declining to prosecute others. In mid-October, Briana Wu, this is the other one, another independent game developer and co-founder of video game studio giant Space Cat, saw her home address and other identifying information posted on 8chan as retaliation for mocking Gamergate. Wu then became the target of rape and death threats on Twitter and elsewhere. After contacting police, Wu fled her home with her husband, saying she would not allow the threats to intimidate her into silence. Wu announced, Wu announced US $11,000 reward for information leading to a conviction for those involved in her harassment, and set up a legal fund to help other game developers who have been harassed online. As of April 2016, Wu was still receiving threats in such volume that she employed full-time staff to document them. In August 2021, the Washington Post described Wu as a vocal proponent of forgiveness for those harassers who apologize and show they have grown despite the extensive harassment she endured. Harassment related to Gamergate continued for several months after the onset of the controversy. Two critics of Gamergate were targets of attempted swatting. Hoaxed reports to emergency services listened to provoke a SWAT team response at the target's home. The Guardian reported that both swatting attempts were coordinated through the Baphomet subform of 8chan. After the initial rush of threats that caused her to flee her home, Wu documented receiving roughly 45 death threats by April 2015. Silicon Valley investor Mark Andreessen offered up to a $10,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of those who made the threats. Wu's studio, Giant Space Cat, withdrew from the expo hall of PAX East 2015. Wu cited security concerns, lack of confidence in the management, and their failure to return calls. So lack of support in both those cases, if I'm reading that correctly. The Utah State University, they had to back out because they weren't going to properly secure things. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what I understood was going on. And the same thing here, they're not going to take it serious and protect us either. Actress and gamer Felicia Day wrote a blog post about her concerns over Gamergate and her fear of retaliation if she spoke against it. Almost immediately, her home address and phone number were posted online, leading to harassing letters and phone calls. Actor Will Wheaton and former NFL player Chris Clue also posted criticisms of Gamergate. Stephen Colbert questioned why women like Clue had not been threatened by Gamergate, noting that the targets were almost entirely women. I can put this page in the chat, or you guys could probably look it up if you wanted to. It's a really long page, so I was reading through some of it last week. Misogyny and sexism. Gamergate has been described as an expression of sexism and misogyny within gaming culture. Its main themes are opposition to feminism and so-called social justice warriors who are perceived as a threat to traditional video gamers. Women's greater visibility in the gaming industry has seen a corresponding rise in gendered harassment and intimidation directed at them. Among mainstream journalists, the harassment campaign that became known as Gamergate is considered emblematic of this surge of online misogyny. According to Sarah Kaplan, the Washington Post, sexism in gaming is a long documented, much debated, but seemingly intractable problem, and became the crux of the Gamergate controversy. Jamie Weinman, writing in Maclean's, said, whether it was supposed to be or not, Gamergate is largely about women. Discussing Gamergate on ESPN blog, Jane McManus compared the misogyny that women in the gaming industry experience to that faced by the first women entering sporting communities. In October 2015, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau described issues like Gamergate and misogyny in video games as something that we need to stand clearly against. Sexism and misogyny had been identified as problems in the video game industry and online community prior to the events of Gamergate. Sarkeesian considered that the internet has a boys' locker room feel to it. with male users trying to show off to each other, which causes escalating cases of harassment in situations like Gamergate, a competition. In March 2014, game designer Cliff Bleszinski wrote a blog post on the latent racism, homophobia, and misogyny that existed between the online gaming community. In a November 2014 interview with Develop, Wu said the game industry has been a boys' club for 30 years, and that the common portrayal of women as sex symbols and damsels in distress in video games has led to the players taking the same attitudes. Brendan Sinclair, writing for gamesindustry.biz, stated that the events of the Gamergate controversy were reprehensible and saddening, and that this industry has some profound issues in the way it treats women. So they portray women as sex symbols and damsels in distress, and the ones that play the game wind up taking on those same attitudes. Many commentators have said that the harassment associated with Gamergate springs from this existing well deep-seated misogyny, and that it was merely brought to the fore by the anonymity, is that what that is? Anonymity of the internet. Lisa Nakamura, a professor of digital studies at the University of Michigan, wrote that Gamergate, quote, showed the world the extent of gaming misogyny, end quote. In an attack with the BBC, Quinn stated that before Gamergate had a name, it was nothing but trying to get me to kill myself, trying to get people to hurt me, going after my family. There's no mention of ethics in journalism at all outside of making the same accusation everybody makes towards any successful woman, that clearly she got to where she is because she had sex with someone. Danielle Citron of the University of Maryland wrote that the intent of this type of harassment is to demean the victim, make them doubt their own integrity, and to redefine the victim's identity in order to fundamentally distort who she is. There's something to be said about learning to stand up for stuff rather than to be touched by it or affected by it, but rather to be angry because of it. I was thinking about those women in the Miss Universe pageant. They were angry, remember?
Yeah.
I'll read one more paragraph here. Targets of Gamergate supporters have overwhelmingly been women, even when men were responsible for the supposed wrongdoings. Writing in the New Yorker, Simon Parkman observed that Quinn was attacked while the male journalist who was falsely accused of reviewing their work favorably largely escaped, revealing the campaign as a pretense to make further harassment of women in the industry permissible. In the New York Times, Chris Sulentrop said that a petition sought to have a female colleague fired for criticizing the portrayal of women in Grand Theft Auto 5. While he and many other male critics raised similar concerns, but did not face similar reprisals, most commentators have described Gamergate as consisting largely of white males, though some supporters have said it includes a notable percentage of women, minorities, and LGBT members. So I'll leave it there if anybody wants to read more.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of know a little bit more about it too, just to better understand the articles that, the one article that was posted a while back, and then this one too.
So just as a reminder, Gamergate was 2014. It's one of those topics events that happened in 2014 that Elder Tess said that we should be aware of for repeat for the Sunday law, for the big line.
The sexism and crimes against women.
Right. Exactly.
So, well, I'm sorry, I missed part of you guys. I went through that article last week as well. That one took me an hour to read.
Yeah, it was a real long article.
Yeah. But it's amazing the attitudes that people have.
Yeah, that victim attitude.
But the internet really played a role in it, and giving them a place to, kind of like the incels. Phil did the one on incel. Gave them a place behind the scenes to, I don't know if venting is the right way, but air their grievances. And it didn't start out that way, if I remember right, but it became that way, to air their grievances, and then they just kind of fed off of each other. And maybe Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but they became this sense of entitlement.
Yes, that's what it was. It's a sense of entitlement. And, the commonality between what we read tonight, Gamergate, incel, women are not human beings.
Yeah.
They're objects. Christina was just mentioning about, this is, happened back in 2014, and Elder Tess wants us to know about this because it connects to the Sunday law. So it's not, we think about this carefully. It's not going to, how do I say this? It's not just going to affect women that we don't know. It's going to affect every one of us, because Elaine is going to affect you, Sarah is going to affect you, Victoria, because anybody who stands up, just like Sarkeesian, she was not a gamer, but a feminist who stood up for these other ladies who were being threatened. They're able to find your name, your address, whatever, through the internet, and we're going to be out there exposed to the world and to the death threats and all kinds of violent, vehement, ugly words. We're going to be called every kind of nasty words, and people are going to know it. And, we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for that? Because, just like, what's her name, Wu, and, they had to flee their homes because they were being death threats, rape threats. So they had to flee.
I can definitely say I'm being prepared for that.
Excuse me?
That's it. I said I can definitely say I'm being prepared for that.
Well, yeah, well, good, because that's what we have to realize.
Yep.
Because, when we stand with them, we're going to get those threats too. And it's going to get ugly.
Yeah, because it's not going away. When we see what's going on with the far right, how their behavior is not going away, it's only escalating. So when the Sunday law comes and we're taking that stand in the name of God for women's rights, and against sexism, I can imagine the battle's going to be far more intense than what we saw to those women.
Yeah. Now, I know this was unrelated, or maybe it is related. I don't know. But, Elder Parminder was talking about Ukraine. I mean, the subject was about Russia and Ukraine. And he wasn't specific, but he said it's going to, I can't remember the words he said, but it's going to hurt us in a personal level. And so I'm not sure, quite what he meant by that, but I can definitely see this hurting us personally.
Yeah, there was some discussion going on about what was he referring to? you know,
Yeah.
because he was talking in lines of nuclear activity as well. I need to rewatch those again.
Froze.
Huh?
You froze.
I froze. Okay. He was talking in lines of nuclear war happening.
Was there any justice done for those women, or at least for her who stood up and spoke
And
up?
no, I can send you the article if you want to read the rest of it, because I didn't finish the whole, it's a whole big long Wikipedia page.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know what was done to the harassers. That I mean, just in general, because it seems like, how is it that they can get away with that? I mean, I understand the way our world is, but it's just kind of like, I mean, it's just sad because I see, just from my own life experience, how people can get away with harassment, even when someone speaks up.
So you can read a little bit more if you guys want. I just went down to the bottom of it. It says the women targeted by Gamergate have continued to be attacked in right-wing media and on men's rights websites, and have been forced to limit their public appearances and social media activity. It has been go ahead.
So nothing has been done. They're being continued.
What's going to happen, because we know that it's going to come as we find our voice and we get involved in understanding what has been done to these women and have our bleeding hearts to want to help. I'm referring to, I just finished the notes for the Battle of Raphia. I think it's the Battle of Raphia, where at the end she's talking about being able to identify, being able to look at the pain and the suffering that is going on, to have it break our hearts and bring us to that place. So it's going to come to be worse before it's over. It has to. So it's not going away, but it says it has been argued that Gamergate helped elect Donald Trump as US president in 2016 and assisted other right-wing movements. Melissa Rosenberg called Trump the Gamergate Republican politics in an opinion article for the Washington Post in 2015. Trump's strategist Steve Bannon remarked that through Milo, I can't say that name, who rose to fame during the controversy as the technology journalist for Breitbart, he had created a generation that came in through Gamergate and then get turned onto politics and Trump. In 2015, Yasmin Kafi, chair of the Teaching, Learning, and Leadership Division at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, said that what Gamergate has changed is not the situation for women and minorities in gaming, but it has changed the public perception. In 2016, Vox said that Gamergate's success, the article we just read was 2015, I think she says, right? But it might be talking about the same article, it sounds like. In 2016, Vox,
The article was written like just around the time of Gamergate. Like the last few paragraphs were after Gamergate had started. So it was published around August 2015.
Yeah, I thought it said it on there, yeah. So in 2016, Vox said that Gamergate's success gave many on the extreme right a template for how to attack their perceived enemies, and that the methods deployed in this Ground Zero Gamergate's event have since become standard practice for internet mobs wishing to attack seemingly anyone they believe to be a foe. As of 2018, not only are Gamergate supporters still active, but its most visible advocates seem to be thriving in the age of President Trump. In a retrospective for Slate in August 2019, Evan Urquhart wrote that Gamergate was still active on Reddit and that its members continue to harass journalists. However, Urquhart also commented that Gamergate had not stopped socially conscious games journalism efforts to increase diversity in games or individuals like Quinn and Sarkeesian. In a retrospective for the New York Times, Charlie Warzel said that Gamergate is occasionally framed as a battle for the soul of the internet between diverse, progressive set and an angry collection of white males who feel displaced. And it is that too, but its most powerful legacy is as proof of concept of how to wage a post-truth information war. In a retrospective for TechCrunch, John Evans stated that the mainstream media had not learned how to combat Gamergate-like strategies and criticize coverage from the New York Times in particular. In a retrospective for Vox in January 2020, Asia Romano stated that police, businesses, and social media platforms are still susceptible to Gamergate-like tactics and that they would have to change in order to keep victims safe. In a retrospective of Polygon in December 2019, Sarkeesian said that Gamergate's real goals were expressed in the explicit racism, sexism, and transphobia of the memes the movement generated and the posts its supporters wrote on the message boards where they organized and strategized. Later, the flimsiness of the ethics in games journalism pretense would become a mocking meme signifying a bad faith argument. It would almost be funny if Gamergate hadn't done so much harm and caused so much lasting trauma. In the aftermath of the 2021 United States Capitol attack, Briana Wu said everything, let me read that again. It almost, if Gamergate hadn't done so much harm and caused so much lasting trauma, okay, that was the end of that sentence. Seems like an incomplete sentence. It would almost be funny if Gamergate hadn't done so much harm and caused so much lasting trauma. Okay, in the aftermath of the 2021 United States Capitol attack, Briana Wu said that everything I tried to get the FBI to act on in the aftermath of Gamergate has now come true. We told people that if social media companies like Facebook and Reddit did not tighten their policies about these communities of organized hate, that we were going to see violent insurrection in the United States. We told people that these communities were organizing online for violence and extremism. That, unfortunately, has proven to be true. Joan Donovan, research director at Harvard's Short Media Politics, said the key figures in Gamergate worked to raise online fury ahead of the attack.
That was helpful. I didn't realize that connection between Gamergate and the insurrection and Trump and all that. So that was a really helpful article. Thank you.
Yeah. Well. Okay, so
Let's 8:12.
yeah. Do you want to close in prayer?